open up your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter 9. 1 Kings chapter 9, we're going to pick up in verse 25 here in just a moment. We're working our way through 1 Kings, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. We're well into the life of Solomon and what we know of him. Over the past few times together, we weren't together here in 1 Kings last week, but over the last few times together, we've seen Solomon complete the construction of the temple. We've seen him, remember that took 7 years for him to complete the temple, and then he completed his own home. We saw him dedicate the temple. We saw him address the people of Israel, and he called them to worship the Lord only. He offered sacrifices, and when I say he offered sacrifices, he offered a lot of sacrifices, hundreds of thousands of animals that were offered in sacrifice there in the dedication of the temple. He had built his home for his Egyptian bride. He had built several cities for defense. He had built stables for his horses. We'll see that here this evening once again. This evening we're going to come and we're going to look at Solomon's lifestyle. Now, you already know a little bit about Solomon's lifestyle. When I mention Solomon, you probably think of two words that start with W. You probably think of wisdom, and you probably think of women. And you might think of a third, which would be, also starts with a W, wealth. And we're going to see all of those here this evening, though we're going to focus on the wisdom, and we're also going to see the wealth and several other things. We actually start with his worship here in verse 25. Read with me. It says, "And 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built unto the Lord. And he burnt incense upon the altar that was before the Lord, so he finished the house." So when it says this, it says that Solomon offered burnt offerings. It's not that Solomon went in and slit the throat of the animal or whatever it was, or offered the incense. That was forbidden. The king was not to offer sacrifices. As a matter of fact, if you read ahead and you go into a little bit later in 2 Chronicles, you'll find the story of a king named Uzziah who tried to offer incense in the presence of the Lord. And as a result of that, he was struck with leprosy. So it's not that Solomon is personally offering sacrifices, but he is providing for the sacrifices to be offered. It says that 3 times in the year. Now, if we want to look at a parallel passage, we can find out what those 3 times were, which, by the way, remember, for Solomon to go up to the temple, how long of a commute are we talking here? Do you remember? It would be measured in feet, not even yards, how far the man had to go to be from his house onto temple grounds. It wasn't a long distance from Solomon's home to the temple. But 3 times in the year, specifically, he had set aside that he would be offering these sacrifices, or having these sacrifices offered. In 2 Chronicles 8:12, we read, "Then Solomon offered burnt offerings unto the Lord on the altar of the Lord, which he had built before the porch, even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feast, 3 times in the year." Here they are, what we were reading about in verse 25. 3 times in the year, even in the feast of unleavened bread, which that would have been started this past Friday, if we're talking about the week that we're in right now. So that was in connection with Passover. So the day Passover started in the evening, the Feast of Unleavened Bread started the next morning. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. So if we wanted to boil this down, essentially what we're seeing is that Solomon was an observant Jew. He was observant of the law of Moses. He worked with the sacrifices, the daily sacrifices, and the big sacrifices, the big feasts, when they would come together. Now it's difficult, as I read through this, and probably for you as well, it's difficult not to allow what I know is coming in the life of Solomon to kind of color how I feel about Solomon. I read this and I think, well, at this point, he's walking in the footsteps of his father David. He's doing that which is right in the sight of the Lord. But again, I know what's coming, and so do you. We see his worship. Next, in this chapter, we have his navy. You say this, why does it jump from that? Well, there's a reason. Look with me at verse 26. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. Let me show you here on a map where we're talking about. So you see the two fingers right there? That's the Red Sea. And the Red Sea, if you see the fingers that I'm talking about there, the whole arm, that is the Red Sea down there. And then it goes up. On this side, the western finger is the Gulf of Suez. And if it goes up, nowadays, it goes up and there's the Suez Canal that connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. The other side, the eastern finger, is called the Gulf of Aqaba. And it's on the Gulf of Aqaba that Solomon built his navy. And that was where they could come. If you go from where that arrow is pointing and you go just straight north, you go into the territory of Israel, the territory that was controlled by King Solomon during his reign. From this port, the ships of Solomon could trade with places as far away as some reports have them going down to India, which that's a long trip. Some of them would have his ships going down into the parts of Africa, down on the eastern coast of Africa. Verse 27 gives us a little bit more information. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen, that had knowledge of the sea with the servants of Solomon. How do we know Hiram? He's the one who supplied Solomon with the supplies for the temple and also for his own house. He was the king of Tyre, which is straight north of Israel. It would be in modern-day Syria, Lebanon, that area up in there. And the Phoenicians, which is what the people of Tyre were, the Phoenicians were expert mariners. And so they worked in tandem with the men of Solomon's navy. Solomon needed people who were very experienced, and so he kind of allied himself with Hiram, and they got together and sent their ships far and wide. And we'll deal with more of that in the next verse, and then a little bit later in the chapter, verse 28. And they came to Ophir, and fetched from thence gold, 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon. Now, Ophir is talked about throughout Scripture. And it's interesting because almost every time you read of Ophir, it's in this connection. It's in connection with gold. Apparently, a lot of gold in this place called Ophir. We don't know exactly where it was, but many believe probably somewhere down towards the south of the Arabian Peninsula. What is a talent? When I think of talents, I think of gold bars, and probably you do too. The gold bars in Fort Knox, the gold bars that are supposed to be at Fort Knox, I guess I should put the asterisk there now, but the gold bars that are supposed to be in Fort Knox weigh 27.5 pounds each. The bars of gold, the talents of Solomon, were considerably larger. The biblical measurement was larger. 2 Chronicles 8:18 sets the number of Solomon's talents at 450 talents. So here in this passage we have 420, 450. There is agreement between the two, but one talent is 75.6 pounds. Now, if you do the math in your head, 75.6 pounds times 450 is 34,020 pounds of gold. That's just over 16 tons of gold that were brought into Solomon's treasury. That's a lot. But understanding Solomon's financial situation, which, by the way, that's not all the gold he had. That's that trip. That's coming out of that one spot, and it was coming out of several. But understanding his financial situation, if you had 16 tons of gold, what couldn't you buy? The answer is you could have whatever you want. And that's exactly what Solomon has. And we'll expand on that in chapter 10. But before that, we have an interlude. We're going to talk about his wealth and his navy, but then we're going to talk about the Queen of Sheba before we talk about his wealth once again. Look at verse 1. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, She came to prove him with hard questions. We'll deal with those questions in a moment. Where is Sheba? Or in some translations it may be Seba. Where is this? On the map here once again, this would be modern-day Yemen. So you have the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula right here. This right, the big kind of finger that you see going up, and if you look at the top, we saw that area zoomed in on a few minutes ago. That's the Red Sea that goes up to the Suez, and then also to the Gulf of Aqaba. This right here, this in Yemen, would be the same location if you've been watching the news and you keep hearing about the Houthis. This is where the Houthi rebels are. They're blocking the trade that goes up the Red Sea to the Suez. That's the reason why we have been bombing them and doing the different things that we've been doing. The Queen of Sheba would have come from that same general location around the land of Yemen. You can see it's not quite as desert right there, a little bit of greenery there that runs up the coast, but very mountainous in that particular region. So she made this journey. It would have been well over 1,000 miles, almost straight north up the side of the Arabian Peninsula. Not an easy trip. At least 1,000 miles, more close to 12 or 1,300 miles that she would have made. Because she had heard of the King of the Jews, who had built a magnificent temple to their God. She'd heard of his wealth, she'd heard of his wisdom, and it appears that that was the supreme reason for her coming. She wasn't coming just to see his stuff. She was coming to hear his wisdom. She came to prove him. The word prove means to test or to sound out. She wanted to see just how much does this man know? Just how wise is this man? And she did this by asking him difficult questions, which would be the idea of almost riddles, where she would ask the question and Solomon was able to give her the answer. Verse 2, and she came to Jerusalem with a very great train of camels that bear spices and very much gold. We'll talk about how much in a moment. We're talking not dozens of camels, though. We're probably talking hundreds of animals that are bringing this in. This was a long caravan that came up from down there in the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula. Very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. Again, I want you to remember that Solomon is not just an exceptionally intelligent man from birth. He's not a guy who has an extremely high IQ because he comes from parents of high IQ. Rather, you know and I know back from chapter 3 when God said, ask me what I shall give thee, Solomon said, what I really need is wisdom. And so Solomon right here, we're seeing in chapter 10, we're seeing the answer of a prayer in chapter 3, where he had asked God for wisdom. We're not told of the specifics of their conversations, but it is fascinating that we read about the Queen of Sheba in the New Testament as well. In Matthew chapter 12, Jesus is giving condemnation to the people who were actively rejecting the Messiah. Jesus was talking to people in Matthew 12, and he was making some parallels. He said in Matthew 12:42, the Queen of the South, speaking of the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of the South shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. What is Jesus saying? How do we interpret this? We have a woman of the Old Testament, the Queen of Sheba, who was willing to load up who knows how many animals and travel 1,200 miles over rough terrain so that she could talk to Solomon and hear of his wisdom. And Jesus, here in the New Testament, is pointing out that there are people in Israel who are sitting across the table, essentially, from the Son of God, and they're rejecting him. So, if the Queen of Sheba was willing to travel to hear Solomon, then one day in the judgment she'll stand up and condemn those men who were in the very presence of the Christ, but wouldn't hear him, the one who is greater than Solomon. Given these two passages, what we have here in 1 Kings and also there in Matthew 12, I think it is entirely reasonable to assume that Solomon would have told the Queen of Sheba about Jehovah. That he would have told her about the Messiah who would be coming through his line because of the line of David. The one who would redeem mankind. The one who had given him his wisdom. The one whose temple she had come to see. Remember, his house is not even a stone's throw from the temple. And so he would be able to point, to gesture and say, that right there. Remember, because the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat, he could say, that's where my God dwells. And one day he's going to send a Redeemer. I think it's entirely reasonable to assume that Solomon had these discussions with the Queen of Sheba. So the big question, did she accept Jesus? Will we meet the Queen of Sheba in heaven? And the answer is, we have no idea. We have no record. We don't know. We don't know from the Old Testament. There's no record of her converting. There's no record of her offering sacrifices in the temple. We don't know what happened after this. But one day we will. Look with me at verse 4. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom, and the house that he had built, and the meat of his table. Do you remember talking about how much meat, how many animals went to feed this man in his household? Lots, every day. When she had seen this, and the meat of his table, the sitting of his servants, the attendance of his ministers and their apparel, and his cupbearers and his ascent, by which he went up unto the house of the Lord. Real quick. Again, it's not far from Solomon's house to the temple, but he built a walkway that went from one to the other so that he was able to go up by a raised, like a gallery, to go over to the house of the Lord. She saw this, and there was no more spirit in her. And she said to the king, it was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came, and mine eyes had seen it. And behold, the half was not told me. Again, how much gold did he get just out of Ophir? 16 tons of gold. So he would definitely be able to put on a pretty impressive show. The half was not told me. Thy wisdom and prosperity exceedeth the fame which I had heard. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants which stand continually before thee, and that hear thy wisdom. Blessed be the Lord thy God, which delighted in thee, to set thee on the throne of Israel, because the Lord loved Israel forever. Therefore made he thee king, to do judgment and justice. This reminds me, her speech here to Solomon reminds me of the writing of Solomon. In Proverbs 29:2, it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked bear rule, the people mourn. Can we attest to this truth right here? We certainly can. We see it. We've seen it in our land, and we've seen it certainly in the days of Israel. By the way, this verse right here, Proverbs 29:2, is going to play out in living color throughout the rest of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. We're going to see this again and again. You'll see in the north, where it was all wicked kings in the kingdom of Israel, we're going to see the people being miserable, the people having to mourn. But in the south, where you had the occasional good king, we'll see the people rejoice. It's worthy of note right here, what we're reading, 1 Kings chapter 10, is the high water mark for Israel to date. And this was thousands of years ago. This right here, Israel at this point of Solomon's reign, Israel has more territory, greater riches, more peace, and higher influence than at any other time in their history, again, including today. They had, this is Israel right here. This is their peak today. Now, it's not the peak that they will have forever. There's coming good times for Israel in the future. But this right here, this chapter, we're seeing Israel's peak. Verse 10. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold. You say, how do you know that there were a lot of donkeys? Because that translates to 9,072 pounds of gold. You don't put that on 2 camels. She had a large retinue, a large caravan that she would have come to bring that much gold. She gave 120 talents of gold, and of spices, very great store, and precious stones. And there came no more such abundance of spices as these which the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Spices. We think of them, and you've got a spice cabinet, or you've got a cupboard in your kitchen, and you've got spices. That was a sign of tremendous wealth in the olden days. If you were to go and you were to take all of the spices out of the Hy-Vee or the Fairway or Walmart in Washington, there have been wars fought. There have been armies go into the field and kill each other over less spice than are present in one grocery store in the United States. Spices were a big deal, and this Queen of Sheba brought not only several tons of gold, but also tremendous spices. Which, given the fact that Solomon had so much gold, he might have appreciated the spices more than the gold that she brought. I don't know that, but reading between the lines a little bit. Let's talk about his wealth here just a little bit more. By the way, this is all going somewhere, so hold tight. Solomon's wealth in verse 11. And the navy also of Hiram, remember the king of Tyre, where they joined together down there in Ezion-Geber. It says, the navy also of Hiram that brought gold from Ophir, brought in from Ophir great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. Almug trees, we're not sure, but probably sandalwood trees, which if you go and you find sandalwood, you know that it has a distinct smell to it, a pleasant smell, but the oil that comes out of sandalwood makes the wood itself valuable. They brought great plenty of almug trees and precious stones, and the king made of the almug trees pillars for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, harps also and psalteries for singers. There came no such almug trees, nor were seen unto this day. So again, extreme luxury. Verse 13. And King Solomon gave unto the queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked, beside that which Solomon gave her of his royal bounty. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. This again is very common in this day, for royalty to not just receive, but to also give gifts as a sign of hospitality. It also solidifies the relationship between two countries. With Solomon's navy coming down out of the Gulf of Aqaba and down the Red Sea, they would have been passing by the land of Sheba, and so it wouldn't be unusual for them to probably make port there before they would set out to further points. Verse 14. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. If you're trying to figure it out, that's 666 talents of gold. Approximately 25 tons of gold that he was taking in year by year. Now, I don't know what gold is trading for right now, spot price in the United States, but if you were to translate it out, I think it's at close to $3,000 an ounce. That's a lot of money that is coming into Solomon's coffers on a regular basis. Beside this, verse 15, beside that, he had of the merchantmen and of the traffic of the spice merchants and all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the country. He's got a lot of money. He's got everything that he could possibly want. If Solomon had sat down and decided to spend his money, he couldn't have done it. There was just so much, and it was increasing at such a pace. So what did he do with it? You need to note this, what happens next in verse 16. Solomon's going to make some golden shields. You need to remember these shields, because remember what I said a moment ago. 1 Kings 10 is the high water mark for the nation of Israel. This is their peak to date. This is the time when God's greatest blessing was upon His people. This is a time when His blessing and His presence were seen in abundance. And so Solomon decided that he was going to take some of this precious metal, this gold, and he was going to make some shields with it. When there is enough of a precious metal that you start making your weaponry, even ceremonial weaponry, out of it, that's pretty significant. If the United States were to start making our tanks out of gold, that sends a message to our enemies that they must have a lot of money. Look what they're doing. In Solomon's case, he's certainly able to back that up. Look with me at verse 16. And King Solomon made 200 targets of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went to one target. The word target is the word shield or buckler. Each made of 600 shekels of gold. So that's about 7.5 pounds of gold. And it would be beaten out, and then it would be plated on to these shields that were made. So he made 200 targets that were 7.5 pounds of gold each. Verse 17, and he made 300 shields of beaten gold. Again, the same word, but these would be smaller. 3 pounds of gold went to one shield, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. So these smaller shields, they're hung in the northern residence of the king. Now, you have to remember these. You have to remember Solomon's gold shields, because they're going to come up again in verse 14, or in chapter 14, after Solomon is dead. You need to remember Solomon's shield. So if you have to put a little asterisk by it, do that. But you need to remember, and you need to remember that Solomon made these shields of gold at a time of God's greatest blessing. They were kind of emblematic of the golden age of Israel. Boy, you remember back when Solomon was making those shields? You remember how it was back then? That's how people are going to look at these. They became kind of emblematic of the nation. It was a big deal. People talked about these golden shields that had been made. Now, we're not going to deal with them until we get to chapter 14, but you need to know that he's built these. We've got 500 shields, 200 of the big ones, 300 of the smaller ones, and they're hung up, they're displayed. People could see them, and people would talk about them. Look with me at verse 18. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory. Where's ivory come from? You remember? Elephants. It comes from elephant tusks. The king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side on the place of the seat. And 2 lions stood beside the stays, and 12 lions stood there on the one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not the like made in any kingdom. And all King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, and all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was nothing accounted of in the days of Solomon. That's how wealthy they were, that silver, its bottom dropped out. Nobody wants silver. Now, the question that you're probably wondering as we read about this throne is, were these real lions or fake lions? Because that's what I think. I think it's a pretty cool sounding throne that he's got 14 lions leading up to his throne. And ultimately, when we ask the question, were they real or were they statues? We ultimately don't know, but I do think it's significant that it mentions the stays, that the lions were hooked to stays. Now, if they were ceremonial, if they had been carved out of stone, perhaps you would have put them on stays so that they looked more natural. And we do have record of kings having carved statues of lions beside their throne. But judging simply on my understanding of something, just the feeling that I get from this chapter, I think, and here speak I think they were probably real, because I think it was kind of a power move for the man. I mean, why not? He's got the money. He could hire people to take care of his lions if he wanted to. So he's got a pretty magnificent throne with these lions, be they real, be they fake, whatever, but they're leading up to his throne. This was something to see. Verse 22. For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish, with the navy of Hiram. 1 in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory and apes and peacocks. He said, what on earth do you do with apes and peacocks? They were just for fun. And you can do that when you have 25 tons of gold. You can have apes and peacocks and whatever else you want. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and for wisdom. We're laying it on a bit thick, but again, we're just reading Scripture. This man had enough money to do whatever he wanted, which, by the way, is exactly what God had said that he would do for Solomon. Back in chapter 3, when God said, ask me whatsoever I shall give you, and Solomon said, I need wisdom. Do you remember what God said? This is what he said in verse 12 of chapter 3. Behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and an understanding heart, so that there is none like before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. And I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. God's keeping all of his promises. You want wisdom? You got it. But in addition to wisdom, I'm going to pour wealth on you. Verse 24. And all the earth sought to Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put in his heart. And they brought every man his present, vessels of silver, which they were probably disappointed at how they were received when they arrived, vessels of silver and vessels of gold, garments and armor, spices, horses, and mules, a rate year by year. Listen to this as we finish out the chapter. Verse 26. And Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. And he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. When you think of chariots, if you've ever seen Ben-Hur, one of the old movies with chariots, and you think of one man in a chariot, that's not what these were. Chariots in this day, they were larger. They would have multiple people. They would have a driver. Then many times they would have 1 or 2 archers and some spearmen. It was a mobile platform. And Solomon has quite a few here. He has 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots and with the king of Jerusalem. And the king made silver to be in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars made he to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. And Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt and linen yarn. King's merchants received the linen yarn at a price, and a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and an horse for 150. And so for all the kings of the Hittites, for the kings of Syria, did they bring them out by their means. Now, while it is true that Solomon had tremendous riches that were coming into him from other places to support his lavish lifestyle, we will also find out in the chapters to come that there was a tremendous tax burden on the people of Israel as well. How would you feel in the United States of America if we didn't have a president, a representative republic, but rather we had a monarchy, and the king lived like this? How would you feel when April 15th rolled around? Would you feel exceptionally generous and you'd think, boy, I just really want to help the poor guy out? Is that how you'd feel? That's not how I feel now, and I don't have this. I don't have this going on. The children of Israel were not pleased with this. They weren't happy with the situation. Now, they lived in peace. They had tremendous respect. You want to talk about the lap of luxury, it's here, but it does come at a cost. Solomon is sowing discontent among his subjects. Now, I've already drawn your attention to this passage in the course of our study in 1 Kings, but I want to read to you in Deuteronomy, which, by the way, hundreds of years before Israel had any king, we read this about when they would have a king. It says, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt. Well, you say, well, Solomon didn't do that. You're right. Solomon didn't take the people to Egypt. What did he do? He brought Egypt to the people. Remember who he married? He married the daughter of the king of Egypt. Nor calls the people to return to Egypt to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord hath said unto you, ye shall henceforth return no more that way. Verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. If you were giving Solomon a report card from Deuteronomy chapter 17, how are you rating him? What's his grade? He's not passing. He's not doing well. He's breaking all of these because Solomon allowed the blessings of God to bring about his own disobedience to God's explicit commands. Solomon's opulent lifestyle, his famed wealth, and his unheard of riches, they didn't draw him closer to the Lord, did they? We often think, and maybe you daydream occasionally, think, boy, if I had this much money, boy, think of how easy things would be. And they say money doesn't solve problems, but it does solve some problems, doesn't it? Money does help in some issues. But if you have all of this, as Solomon did, it didn't make him closer to the Lord. He didn't need anything. He wasn't fighting on any fronts. But it put distance between him and the Lord. And there's a fly in the ointment coming here. If you look ahead at the very first phrase of chapter 11, but King Solomon loved many strange women. That's where we'll start next time together here in 1 Kings. This is the peak. This is Solomon's peak for sure. This is Israel's peak as well. This is as good as it has been for the nation of Israel, and this is as good as it will be for Solomon. What do we take away from this passage? This has been a different passage than some. It's not as much of the story, and it's a lot more information. What can we take from this? Here it is. Solomon's wealth and his wisdom served as a testament to the God that he served, causing people to come from afar to hear and to see God's blessing. You don't go 1,200 miles on a camel if it's not really something to see. And she even said, the Queen of Sheba, she said, I heard about it, and I didn't hear the half of it. It's beyond my expectations. Solomon did a good job in pointing the Queen of Sheba to the source of his blessing. But somewhere along the line, and we don't know where, we don't have it recorded for us, here or in 2 Chronicles, but somewhere along the line, Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, forgot that all that he possessed was because of God's benevolence. And here's the application to us here in the United States of America in 2025. We who live blessed lives of abundance, and we all do, we who live blessed lives of abundance, we need to beware of the tendency that we have to allow God's blessings to crowd out God himself. We've been blessed. All of us here. And I can say that without reservation. We've all been blessed. And if we're not careful, the same tendency exists for us to allow the blessings. In Romans 1, one of the signs of sin, one of the end stations on the line of sin is to worship and serve the creature more than the Creator. This happens if we're not careful. We need to beware. We need to take the lesson from Solomon, a man who had it all, literally, but who allowed the blessings to replace the blesser. He didn't focus on the Lord. There's going to come a point he's going to start focusing on all that money can buy. I would encourage you, if you sit down this week, sit down, given everything that we've just read about Solomon, sit down and read the book that he wrote called Ecclesiastes. And see if you can reconcile Ecclesiastes, which is a pretty dark book, with a man who had everything. And learn the lessons from Solomon. Don't allow the blessings of God to replace God himself. Any thoughts, questions, or comments that you have before we close in a word of prayer here this evening? All right. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we We thank you for the accounts of Scripture. We thank you for these truths that we've seen. And Lord, it's amazing to think about, amazing to go down these lines of thought about Solomon and all that he had, the wealth that you blessed him with, the wisdom that you blessed him with. Lord, but it's tragic because in the back of our minds we know what's coming. We know that he allowed the blessings that you blessed him with to come between him and you. We know that he allowed the women who came into his life to pull him away from you. And Lord, I pray that we would learn these lessons. I pray that we would learn from Solomon's experience without having to experience that ourselves. I pray that we would seek to put you first, that we would remember the source of every good and perfect gift. Lord, I pray you'd be with those who were with us this morning, Lord, perhaps who had never heard the gospel or who had never accepted. Lord, I pray that you help them to just have it burned into their minds. I pray that we would be able to hear of some trusting you. Lord, I pray that you would be with us throughout this week. I pray that you'd help us to walk closely with you, that we would serve you with our whole heart, our whole mind, and our whole soul. We will give you all the praise for what you accomplish in us and through us. In Jesus' name.